Jedediah Jed Stone was a man whose weathered face told tales of countless miles driven under the unforgiving Arizona sky. His calloused hands held the reins of the Concord Stagecoach with a practiced ease, guiding the six-horse team along the familiar, if often treacherous, route between the dusty outpost of Redemption Gulch and the slightly more civilized town of Blackwood Creek. Jed prided himself on his punctuality and his ability to navigate the rough terrain, earning him a reputation as one of the most reliable drivers in the territory. However, the usual route had become increasingly perilous. A band of particularly ruthless outlaws, led by a shadowy figure known only as Viper, had been terrorizing the region, their ambushes becoming bolder and more frequent. Several stagecoaches had been robbed, passengers left stranded, and the threat of violence hung heavy in the air. The Blackwood Stagecoach Line, Jed's employer, had issued strict instructions: stick to the main road, travel in daylight whenever possible, and under no circumstances deviate from the established path. But the main road was predictable, a sitting duck for Viper and his gang. Jed, burdened by the responsibility of his passengers and the valuable cargo he often carried, felt a growing unease. One sweltering morning, as Jed prepared for the journey from Redemption Gulch to Blackwood Creek, he overheard a hushed conversation between the station manager, a nervous man named Mr. Abernathy, and a frazzled-looking woman clutching a worn satchel. "But, Mr. Abernathy," the woman pleaded, her voice trembling, "I must reach Blackwood Creek by tomorrow. My sister, she's gravely ill." Mr. Abernathy wrung his hands. "I understand your urgency, ma'am, but with the Viper gang active, the stage won't be running its usual schedule. It's too risky to travel after midday." Jed, listening intently, felt a surge of sympathy for the distraught woman. He knew the desperation that illness could bring. He also knew that sticking to the daylight hours on the main road wouldn't guarantee safety. Viper's gang was becoming increasingly brazen. As the handful of passengers for the day boarded the stagecoach, a grizzled prospector heading to the Blackwood Creek assay office, a traveling salesman with a trunk full of dubious remedies, and the anxious woman, whose name Jed learned was Mrs. Eleanor Davies, Jed made a decision. He couldn't, in good conscience, leave Mrs. Davies stranded. He also couldn't shake the feeling that the main road was a trap waiting to be sprung. Before climbing onto the driver's box, Jed pulled Mr. Abernathy aside. "I'm taking the shortcut through Blackwood Canyon," he said, his voice low and firm. Mr. Abernathy's eyes widened in alarm. "Stone, are you mad? That route hasn't been used regularly in years. It's treacherous, full of washouts and narrow passes. And what if Viper's gang?" "Viper's expecting us on the main road," Jed interrupted, his gaze steady. "Blackwood Canyon is rough, but it's less predictable. We'll make better time, and hopefully, we'll avoid any unwanted company." Mr. Abernathy sputtered in protest, but Jed was already climbing onto the driver's box, the reins firm in his grasp. He gave the signal, and the six horses surged forward, the stagecoach rattling out of Redemption Gulch, not onto the familiar main road, but onto a barely discernible track leading towards the jagged peaks of Blackwood Canyon. The journey through the canyon was indeed arduous. The track was narrow and overgrown, forcing Jed to navigate carefully, his years of experience his greatest asset. The stagecoach lurched and swayed, the passengers jostled and thrown about. Mrs. Davies, though clearly anxious about the unconventional route, expressed her gratitude to Jed for his willingness to take the risk. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long, ominous shadows across the canyon walls, Jed urged the horses onward, pushing them harder than he normally would. He wanted to clear the most treacherous parts of the canyon before nightfall. Just as they rounded a particularly narrow bend, the stagecoach wheels hit a deep rut, sending a jolt through the vehicle. The horses reared in surprise, their hooves scrambling for purchase. Jed fought to maintain control, his muscles straining against the reins. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the canyon, followed by the sickening thud of a horse going down. The stagecoach lurched violently, throwing the passengers against each other. Jed hauled back on the reins, bringing the remaining horses to a skidding halt. Chaos erupted inside the stagecoach. The prospector cursed, the salesman yelped, and Mrs. Davies cried out in fear. Jed quickly assessed the situation. One of the lead horses, A sturdy gelding named Buster lay on the ground, its leg twisted at an unnatural angle. It was clear the animal wouldn't be going any further. Stranded in the deepening twilight, in a remote and dangerous canyon, Jed knew they were in a precarious situation. Darkness would bring its own set of perils, not least of which was the increased risk of encountering Viper's gang, who might be aware of the shortcut. As Jed climbed down from the driver's box to assess Buster's injury, he heard a soft rustling sound coming from the dense underbrush that lined the canyon walls. He instinctively reached for the shotgun tucked beneath his seat. "Who's there?" Jed called out, his voice firm but cautious. Silence. Then, a pair of luminous yellow eyes glinted in the shadows. A low growl rumbled through the undergrowth. Fear gripped the passengers inside the stagecoach. The prospector fumbled for his rusty pistol, his face pale. Jed held his ground, the shotgun raised. He had encountered mountain lions in the canyon before, and they were rarely friendly when cornered. But this creature didn't attack. Instead, it emerged slowly from the shadows. It was a large wolf, its fur the color of granite, its eyes intelligent and wary. It held its head low, and Jed noticed a dark stain on its flank, a clear sign of injury. The wolf whined softly, its gaze fixed on Jed, then flickered towards the downed horse. Jed lowered his shotgun slightly, a flicker of understanding dawning in his mind. The wolf wasn't threatening them, it was hurt. He hesitated for a moment, then made an unexpected decision. He set down his shotgun and slowly approached the injured wolf, his hands held out in a gesture of peace. "Easy there, fella," Jed murmured, his voice calm and soothing. "You're hurt, aren't you?" The wolf watched him warily, its yellow eyes never leaving his face. Jed moved slowly, cautiously, until he was close enough to see the extent of its injury, a deep gash along its side that was still bleeding. The passengers watched from the stagecoach, a stunned silence replacing their earlier fear. The sight of the grizzled stagecoach driver calmly approaching a wild wolf was beyond anything they had expected. Jed reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a strip of clean cloth and a flask of water. He spoke to the wolf in a low, reassuring voice as he gently cleaned the wound. The wolf flinched slightly but didn't try to bite or run. As Jed finished bandaging the wolf's side, the animal licked his hand, a rough, surprisingly gentle gesture. It was then that Jed knew he had found an unexpected ally in the dangerous Blackwood Canyon. An ally whose knowledge of the treacherous terrain might just be what they needed to survive the night and reach Blackwood Creek safely. The alliance between Jed Stone and the injured wolf, whom Mrs. Davies tentatively named Shadow, was an uneasy but surprisingly effective one. As darkness descended upon Blackwood Canyon, Jed made a small fire, its flickering light casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls. Shadow remained nearby, a watchful presence, his yellow eyes constantly scanning the surrounding terrain. Jed tended to the injured horse, Buster, making him as comfortable as possible, though he knew the animal's journey had ended. He shared his meager rations with the passengers, the earlier fear replaced by a hushed awe and a cautious optimism. Mrs. Davies, in particular, seemed to find a strange comfort in Shadow's presence, perhaps sensing a shared vulnerability in their injured states. As the night deepened, strange sounds echoed through the canyon, the hoot of an owl, the rustling of unseen creatures in the underbrush. Each sound sent a shiver of apprehension through the passengers. But Shadow remained alert, his low growls occasionally warning Jed of movement beyond the firelight. Around midnight, Shadow suddenly tensed, his ears perked, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest. He turned his gaze towards the narrow pass they were scheduled to traverse in the morning. Jed, trusting the wolf's instincts, grabbed his shotgun. "Everyone stay quiet," he whispered. "Something's out there." Moments later, the sound of approaching horses reached their ears, several of them, moving with a stealth that spoke of experience. It was likely Viper's gang, perhaps having anticipated Jed's attempt to take the shortcut. Jed knew they were trapped. The canyon walls offered little cover, and they were on foot, slowed by the injured horse. Their only advantage was Shadow. Jed knelt beside the wolf. "Shadow," he murmured, pointing towards the pass. "Trouble's coming. Can you warn them away?" Shadow seemed to understand. With a low whine, he melted into the darkness, moving with a silent grace that belied his size. A few tense minutes later, a series of fierce howls echoed through the canyon, a wild, territorial sound that seemed to carry an unmistakable warning. The sound of the approaching horses faltered, then retreated. Viper's gang, unfamiliar with the canyon and likely wary of a large predator, had been deterred. As dawn broke, casting a pale light on the rugged landscape, Jed knew they couldn't stay in the canyon. They needed to find a way out. Buster's injury meant the stagecoach was immobile. Jed looked at Shadow, who had returned, his gaze steady. "Think you can lead us out of here, fella?" Jed asked. The wolf seemed to understand. He turned and began to move slowly along a narrow, winding path that Jed hadn't noticed in the darkness. Trusting the animal's instincts, Jed and the passengers followed, leading the remaining horses. The path was treacherous, winding through narrow crevices and over rocky terrain. But Shadow moved with an innate knowledge of the canyon, guiding them safely through the maze. By midday, they emerged from the canyon onto a less rugged, though still untamed, landscape. Not long after, they spotted a distant column of dust, a stagecoach heading their way from Blackwood Creek, likely sent to investigate their delay. Relief washed over the weary travelers. As the approaching stagecoach drew near, Shadow stopped, his yellow eyes looking back at Jed. There was a moment of silent understanding between the man and the wolf, a bond forged in a night of shared danger. Jed knelt down and offered his hand. Shadow licked it once more, a final, gentle gesture of farewell. Then, with a final glance, the granite-colored wolf turned and disappeared into the wilderness, melting back into the landscape that was his home. The Blackwood Creek stagecoach arrived, and the relieved passengers recounted their harrowing tale to the astonished driver. Jed simply nodded, his gaze lingering on the direction Shadow had gone. He knew he had found an unexpected ally in the dangerous Blackwood Canyon, an ally whose wild instincts had saved them all. The journey to Blackwood Creek was uneventful. Mrs. Davies reached her sister, the prospector continued to the assay office, and the salesman, though shaken, peddled his wares. Jed arrived in Blackwood Creek a day late, but with all his passengers safe. Mr. Abernathy was beside himself with worry, but upon hearing the tale of the shortcut, the ambush averted by a wolf, and the safe arrival of the passengers, his fear turned to bewildered gratitude. Jed never forgot Shadow. He often looked towards the rugged peaks of Blackwood Canyon, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected ally who had guided him through danger. He had taken a dangerous route, hoping to avoid trouble, and in doing so, had found a connection that proved more valuable than any schedule or cargo. The wilderness, often perceived as a threat, had offered an unlikely protector, a testament to the unpredictable bonds that could form even in the harshest of landscapes. And Jed Stone, the seasoned stagecoach driver, knew he would forever be indebted to the granite-colored wolf who had been his unexpected ally in the heart of Blackwood Canyon.